Thank you for joining us tonight. In the spirit of reconciliation, P&C Federation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So welcome to our webinar tonight, Staged Return to School and the HSC exams in a COVID-19 safe environment. My name is Natalie Walker, and I'm the President of New South Wales P&C Federation, and I'll be facilitating tonight's webinar. For many of you joining us this evening, we understand this has been a very difficult and confusing time for you, but we would really like to just acknowledge the amazing work that you are all doing to support your children's education. And I hope that throughout this webinar, we can help to clarify any questions and further support you and your children with returning to school and the HSC exams. P&C Federation is putting on tonight's webinar to give parents and carers an opportunity to hear from a panel of representatives from the New South Wales Department of Education, the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, NESA, and the University Admissions Centre, UAC, about plans for the return of students to school and the HSC exams in a COVID-19 safe environment to ensure the safety of students and staff. The webinar will be broken into two sessions tonight, the first being the staged return to school, and the second session will be about the HSC exams. If you'd like to activate the live transcript for this webinar, please go to the icon at the bottom of your screen and click on the Enable Auto Transcription. We've received a number of questions for the panelists that have been submitted prior to this webinar, and we will be prioritising those. But if you do have a question that is not answered, you will be able to ask that throughout the evening by just using the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. And as we are expecting quite a lot of questions this evening, we ask that you don't use the Q&A for your commentary. Please use the chat for that and only put questions in the Q&A. So I'd now like to introduce our panelists. I'd first like to introduce Ruth Owen. Ruth is currently the acting as Group Deputy Secretary of the School Improvement and Education Reform Group. In this role, she's responsible for the delivery of improvements across the lifelong learning journey, covering schools, early childhood education and vocational education, and the operation of New South Wales public school system. Also like to introduce Paul Martin. Paul is the CEO of the New South Wales Education Standards Authority, and prior to his appointment as CEO at NESA in 2019, Paul was the Executive Director of Quality Teaching at NESA, and before that, the Manager of Professional Learning and Initial Teacher Education at the former New South Wales Institute of Teachers. Paul played a key role in the implementation of the New South Wales Government's Great Teacher Inspired Learning Initiative with both NESA and the New South Wales Institute of Teachers, and has been a policy advisor for New South Wales and Australian governments. Paul was also previously an English history teacher. Also here tonight to answer some of your questions, we have Leanne Nixon, Deputy Secretary of School Performance North. We have Paul Wood, Acting Executive Director on the COVID Taskforce. And we have Kim Paino, General Managing Marketing and Engagement for the University Admissions Centre. And we also have some support staff from behind the scenes to help support some of the questions that might be coming through the Q&A. So we'll now go to our first session, which is about the staged return to school. So Ruth, I'll just hand it over to you to just provide a bit of an overview for everyone of where we're currently at, and then we'll go to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Good evening, everybody. Great to see such keen interest in this subject, and I really appreciate everybody's time this evening to join this conversation. I'll just give a few opening statements on where we are on the staged return to school, but really keen to address your questions as far as possible. Let me just acknowledge I'm on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, emerging, and extend those respects to Aboriginal colleagues joining this call today. And as Natalie said, We know this is a really hot topic for everybody. We know this topic has been a real cause of concern for all parents, schools and carers over the last couple of months. It was only a few weeks ago we were at this webinar with some of you previously, where I think the chat was very much divided between parents saying, can you tell us when schools will reopen? Really keen to see our kids get back into education and the social environment of working with their friends. But equally, lots of people saying, you have got to be kidding if you think you're going to open schools with the current COVID climate as it is. And what we've done in our roadmap through to reopening our schools is to try and steer a path through those competing and complementary views and worries. As always, we are driven by health advice, first and foremost. The safety of your children and everybody in our school communities is our primary concern. And everything we've done and everything we'll talk to you about has been done in conjunction with New South Wales Health, generally led by Dr. Kerry Chant, who you'll be familiar with from the 11 o'clock press conferences. But equally, like you, we know continuity of education is really important for children at all stages of their school careers, and getting children back into school, both for their learning and actually for their own mental health, has been also an equal priority for us and for the government. So you will have seen some of our statements about what our staged return to school looks like, and I'll go through some of the elements just in the next couple of minutes. I would say we've tried to do our best to learn from the examples globally. We are not alone here in steering through what a return to school looks like in a COVID world. And we've looked at all the conditions that other countries like the US, Canada, UK, Singapore, etc. have adopted in their safe return to school and picked the best of those conditions. I would also say we have tried to align our plans with the roadmap to freedom that you would have heard the Premier announce last week, about how generally the economy is going to reopen as New South Wales reaches 70% double dose vaccination and then on to 80%. However, there are some important differences between what we're doing in the school sector and what other sectors within the economy are doing. So we'll try to draw those out for you so you're clear. When are we talking about something that's about the economy opening more broadly, and when are we talking about actually the specific return to school plan and the conditions for that? Not least because we recognise we are dealing with our precious children across New South Wales, not all of whom will have had the chance to be vaccinated by the time we return to school. So slightly different conditions do apply. We have also tried to align guidance with the stay-at-home orders. So some of you may be in parts of regional New South Wales whose schools reopened this week. So we have to recognise that the health advice applies differently according to different parts of the state. And as stay-at-home orders change, we will adopt different practices and settings for the schools in those areas. I realise that does make things quite complicated to work out which setting am I in, which LGA am I in. So feel free to ask all those questions as we open up. As we've talked about before on the previous webinar, not all the details are fully worked out for the plan. We've got a few weeks to go through those details with New South Wales Health, and as you'll appreciate, things change fairly regularly in the health settings. But we are aiming to complete a detailed plan for return to school for our schools and for parents, and to publish that in the first week of October. So you will have, both as P&C associations or as parents, a really clear written down description of the settings that you can expect in your school and how we've got there, and you will have those conversations with your principals and school executive team about how they apply in the particular context of your schools. But let me just set out the key planks of our plan, as you will have read them, I'm sure. It is a staggered return, year by year, cohort by cohort, from the 25th of October in those areas of particularly Greater Sydney, but across the state that are under stay-at-home orders now, we will be inviting Year 12s, Kindy and Year 1 students back into school. From the 1st of November, we will then invite Years 2, 6 and 11. And then from the 8th of November, we will invite all other cohorts, subject to the appropriate health conditions being appropriate at that time. I think you will realise why we've made those decisions. You'll have lots of questions for us and for Paul Martin about Year 12 and HSC. It is really important to get our Year 12s back as quickly as we can and give them the chance to finish off the education that they've worked on for the last 13 years. So that's why we have prioritised them. But equally, you will also recognise the importance of our youngest learners. Every day lost in these early years of their education, is something they can't make up quickly. So we want to bring our Kindy and Year 1 students back as quickly as possible and get them back into the routines of school, socialising with their friends and starting again with their education, building all the work that you and our fantastic teachers have done in their learning from home. But we do realise with those younger students, learning from home has been a bit more tricky than some of our older students. And the reason we've brought back 2, 6 and 11 in the second stage is because they're in those key transition years. It is really important for Years 2, 6 and 11 to get back to school as quickly as possible. Very quickly then, some of the settings that you will see in our return to school plan. You'll have seen that our expectation is all school staff, whether that's teachers, support staff, visitors, will be vaccinated. It's going to be a mandatory requirement for all of our school workforce to be vaccinated to keep our kids safe. All the health advice we've had is the best thing we can do is to keep kids safe, is to have all the adults around them vaccinated. So I'll take this opportunity to encourage everyone on this call also to get vaccinated. And for those students 12 plus, of course, they are now eligible for the vaccine too. And we will be strongly encouraging as many students as possible to get vaccinated before their return to school. In addition to vaccination, the other health settings that we will have will be masks being worn by students and staff indoors, as well as good ventilation around the classroom. We will be bringing classes back by cohort. So wherever we can, we're keeping classes or year groups distinct around the school premises. So they don't mingle, they don't have a lot of, so they do have a lot of social distancing, and we keep them separated as far as possible to minimise the risk of transmission should we have any outbreaks on a school site. So a lot of the things like playgrounds will be kept separate, entry and exits will be kept separate, different start times, different end times, and minimal mixing. For example, social groups and sports, etc., just to keep students as safe as possible. Paul will talk later, I'm sure, about the conditions for exams, but having exams again in large open spaces to minimise mingling of students around the HSC. So those are some of the conditions we've agreed with New South Wales Health will lead to what we hope will be a COVID-safe environment within our schools. And equally happy to take questions, any of those, but also our plans for bringing our students, your children, back safely into the learning environment. We will very much have a focus on their well-being as they return to school. I recognise this time has been tough for all students and parents, and no doubt Leanne can talk more about the plans within the school gate to make sure we have a equal balance between well-being, looking after the resilience of the children as they return to school, getting them back into the routines that they enjoy with school, and then reconnecting them with their learning. So Natalie, that's the headings from our stage return to school. I'm very happy now to open questions and see the kind of questions that everybody has to ask us tonight.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. We really appreciate you taking the time just to give us an update on that. And we do really appreciate the roadmap that the department's put out with the return to school, you know, for many families. But I think, like you mentioned, it can be a little confusing for some, especially, you know, with different LGAs. I'm in a regional area, but we're still in the lockdown, but we know some near us have been lifted. And you also touched on quite a few areas where we have had a few questions submitted. So we might, as I said, we'd prioritise some of them. And hopefully they'll answer some of the questions in the Q&A, but we'll also come back and have a look at that. But I think something that's definitely on a lot of parents' mind is the vaccinations. We've had quite a few questions come in. And, you know, what some of the questions are, and one is, you know, will children of unvaccinated individuals be permitted on school grounds?
Yes, is the short answer to that. So are you talking about vaccination of parents? Yep, we're not going to discriminate in terms of parents' vaccination status. Obviously, we would encourage everybody to get vaccinated, but yep, all children will be welcome back.
Fantastic. Because I think, that's definitely been, you know, been a concern. But I think we've also got parents, that are sort of, you know, concerned about that age group of some primary students, you know, and they're just wanting to know, would there be any provisions for those wanting to keep children at home until the end of the year, especially since 0 to 12-year-olds can't be vaccinated yet? How do we support families there?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's got concerns about their children returning to school. So as we meet these conditions, as we meet the conditions of the overall state reaching 70% vaccination, the advice from health is with our own workforce safely vaccinated too, then it is safe to return to school. So we are not running a dual system of learning from home and learning from school. As schools reopen, we'll expect students to return. I think it's fair to say we will recognise a degree of caution in parents, but we do really encourage every parent to recognise the settings we've put in place are safe for students to return. There will be times when students will still need to learn from home. That could be because they have become a close contact and may need to self-isolate. It could be when they're sick, but we are not running a dual system. When schools open, we're expecting children back.
Okay, yeah, because that answered one of our other questions was, you know, will families be supported if they wish to keep their children home until they're vaccinated? So this, you're sort of saying that wouldn't be able to happen, that they'd have to come to school still?
Yeah, I mean, as you said in your previous question, there'll be some of our younger learners will not be vaccinated this year, definitely. So, you know, we want them back. We want them back in school when we're confident the school is a safe place to be.
Okay, fantastic. I suppose in regards to vaccinations, if there is any outbreaks, one of the questions we've got is just in regards to testing, and will there be any rapid testing available? So, you know, if the schools, you know, have an outbreak, what's the department's strategy there of supporting with testing?
So where we will have outbreaks, and let's just be honest with each other, there will be outbreaks in a state this big with a Delta virus as it is. It's as now. So as now, if ever we have any outbreaks, and we have had some on school premises, you know, we make the school non-operational. We have a team within the Department of Education who does contact tracing to understand who that child or that school community member has been in touch with, to make sure they're tested and traced. And then we undertake a deep cleaning of that school to make sure it is, again, safe for students and staff to return. At present, we don't have any plans for what's termed rapid antigen testing. We are still looking at that because we have seen that apply in other jurisdictions in other countries. At the moment, self-testing for rapid antigen testing hasn't been authorised within Australia. So some of the models that I know I've seen within my own friends and family in the UK use, for example, that's not licensed here. So we're continuing to work with New South Wales Health on, is that an additional measure that we might apply in schools at some point, but not right now. We don't have that in our plans.
Fantastic. I think that sort of answered quite a few of the questions that we've had in regards to vaccinations and there. But I think one of the other things was about some, school strategies to ensure children's safety, as not all of them are going to be vaccinated. And we're quite aware that, the department's doing an amazing job, supplying a lot of PPE for schools, like you said, relating to masks. But we do have a few questions just relating to masks. If I can just ask you those. One of the questions we've been asked is, how are schools managing mandatory masks for Year 6 children that are 12 years old and the remaining Year 6 children aren't? So
So we will be asking all students to wear masks indoors, including in primary schools now as well. So I see a lot of kids out these days with masks on. I think they're getting used to it. Colleagues who have friends in Asia, other parts of Asia, know that students in those areas have become very familiar with mask wearing. So it's something I think we're going to have to learn to do. We are making sure schools have supplies of masks. We're assuming everyone has their own mask and they can bring it to school. But of course, all students have accidents occasionally. All school students will occasionally forget their mask. So we'll have some supplies on hand. And we will also have some of those see-through masks. I don't know if you've seen those, that where we need to engage with students who need to see lip reading, for example, we will have see-through masks as well.
Yeah. And I think you just mentioned that, students are able to bring their own masks, because that was another question that we sort of had, that if they're able to wear reusable cloth-based masks to school, which obviously, they're allowed to do. So that's great. Again, I think one of the pressing questions, and I have seen some in the Q&A as well, but that we've got here, and you did mention it just in your overview, was in regards to ventilation in schools. It's probably another area of concern for many parents and carers, especially with, school infrastructure across the state of public schools being, so varied. I suppose, how is the department addressing this issue, within our classrooms?
So we do know ventilation is very important. Delta is an airborne strain. So we are watching the science on ventilation, indoor ventilation, very carefully. There isn't very strong evidence on what the right solution is, other than opening windows. And I know that sounds trite, but actually all the best evidence we've got so far is keeping windows and doors open, particularly as we go into summer, is the best way that we can ventilate our classrooms. And obviously many schools do that anyway. We are watching with New South Wales Health evidence on things like filters, CO2 monitors. You'll have seen various other things in the media and globally. We don't have any scientific evidence that they will help right now. So we're keeping a close eye on it. We know it's going to be important, but at the moment we are just making sure that we understand how we keep the airflow through our classrooms through windows and doors being open.
Yeah, I think, we've had a few questions from people asking about the HEPA filter ventilation systems and if they're going to be fitted into classrooms at all. So is this happening, or could it be happening in the future?
We keep an open mind. I think it's probably the best thing to say is we'll watch the science, we'll watch the evidence. No one with any scientific or medical qualifications is telling us that's going to help right now. There's lots of people trying to sell us things. There's lots of people with a view, but no one has shown us the evidence on that. Oh, somebody's just posted something. Thank you. I'll have a look at that later. But yeah, all the guidance we've had so far is those filters are just no better than opening the windows and doors.
Okay. Because one of the questions we've had, which, when you talk about opening windows as doors, is that we had a question come to us saying that they're concerned about adequate ventilation, for young people when they return to school, because some of the windows may not open. So is that something that, principals and schools are looking at in regards to, their classrooms prior to students returning, to making sure that this is all, doors are being able to be open, windows are able to be open to support that ventilation?
Absolutely, yeah. So you might have seen in the media, there was reference, I think, over the weekend to an audit of our school ventilation systems, which is windows and doors. So we've got infrastructure teams going around working with schools and principals now, making sure that we understand, you know, are there any sites where, you know, we all know, as you say, there's a mixed bag of estate across New South Wales, just making sure we haven't got any of those windows that are sort of hinged shut. If we are, what are we going to do about them? Make sure that they will be ready for when the students come back.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, with that, it will be communicated to parents in regards to ventilation, you know, how it's being monitored, and air quality, you know, status being communicated to parents if there are changes happening. Like, the department will be communicating to parents. That's been one of the concerns that's just been raised through one of the questions.
So we will keep in constant contact with parents. You know, this Delta strain, we are learning about it every week, every month. So as we learn anything new medically, scientifically, we'll keep in touch, including through these webinars. I might ask Leanne perhaps to talk about her thoughts on how principals stay in touch with their school communities more locally.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ruth. And thank you for the opportunity tonight, Natalie, to talk to parents across the state. And can I recognise that I'm joining you from Gadigal land today? Always has, always will be. So, you know, that communication as we return to school is absolutely vital. I know that parents are anxious, and understandably anxious. I know there are some that are very keen for their kids to come back, but even those that are keen to not be doing learning from home are rightly concerned about their most valuable thing, their child. And so we're really working closely with principals to make sure that the communication continues. We've had great feedback from people across the state about the communication that's gone on between schools and families, and we're supporting schools to make sure that continues as we return to school. We know that people will be anxious about some of these things, and schools are asking us, they're sending us the messages, they're asking us the same questions so that we can provide them with the right information to provide you. And if any time you have any concern around this, the first place to go is to your principal to ask the question. We have a really strong communication model here. We meet with all of our principals weekly. We have nightly comms going out around this and information. We have a system for feeding all questions up so that we get really good responses to those really quickly, and they come from the health experts. So we do a lot of work around this. So please, if you've got any concerns, any questions, go to your principal, ask, and we'll continue to communicate these as we go forward. Because as Ruth said, we're led by health in this, and it is a changing circumstance. You know, we are looking at the research around air quality in classrooms. We are taking the best advice we can. So it is important to keep asking the questions, because we'll keep researching and looking for the best answers to give to people. So encourage them to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. And it is true. I think, you know, it's just, you know, some parents are, you know, extremely anxious and concerned, you know, for their child's safety. And again, this is why we're doing tonight. You know, it's just great to have some of these questions just answered and out there, you know, to support our parents and carers, you know, and our students. But one of the other topics that sort of come through is in regards to transportation. You know, we've had a question in regards to, is COVID safe transport by buses being included as part of the return to school? Not crowded buses like before. So obviously, you know, this is, you know, quite a metro one as well, with, you know, different people on public transport. So how is transport, you know, being supported, you know, for our students returning to school?
This one might be one for my colleague Paul Wood, who's been working with New South Wales Transport on this.
Thank you, Leanne. Thanks, Natalie. So We have been working with Transport for New South Wales. We've had a number of meetings with Transport around the safe transport of students to and from school. There are a couple of things that we do strongly encourage families to get their children to school outside of public transport, which will help ease some of that pressure. But we do realise that there are families who rely on the public transport network to get to school. At this stage, the COVID safe practices that are in place on public transport should apply to students. So they should be expected to wear masks. They should be expected to distance on those seats of the transport. In some areas where we have small transport companies who provide private transport services to some of our regional schools, there's an opportunity for principals to work with the transport operators. In amongst all of that, however, we also have the safety of children that we need to keep in mind. And we will encourage our bus drivers not to leave any students standing at the side of the road on their own. And so it's a balance between ensuring that students can follow the COVID safe practices on buses, that we can encourage practices to minimise the number of students on buses, but at the same time, ensure that we are looking out for the safety and well-being of our students and not leaving anyone standing on the side of the road. So we'll keep those conversations with Transport going. We're monitoring the attendance of students in schools. We can work with Transport as in increasing and decreasing the number of bus routes that we may be able to provide to schools, and we will continue to keep those conversations going as our students start to return to school.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Paul. Because I think, and that relates to another one of our questions in regards to, parents dropping off and picking up. Is that something that, individuals, schools will also be communicating about, the right, process in regards to how they want parents to be doing this?
Yes, I can jump in and answer that one, Natalie. We have worked with schools, and schools are really good at this sort of stuff. And we learnt lots last year during COVID. But in terms of cohort distancing and processes in schools about making sure that we move lunchtime so that we've got more space, making sure that we do drop off and pick up at different times. So we adjust school hours slightly to make sure that we don't have everyone arriving and leaving at once and crowded hallways, etc. So schools are all considering those things. We've got advice around all those pieces in place. How to ensure that they run assemblies so that not everyone's there at once, how they might do that. We've seen schools that have run assemblies and they do a video out to every classroom so that kids stay in their own class, but they still do assemblies. So there's lots of creative ways that schools have in place to ensure that we do keep our students in smallest group as possible so that we don't have those risks like you've described. So the drop-off and pick up is one of those areas that we're providing advice to schools around.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Leanne. So we've had a few questions too, relating to P&Cs, associations and parents, on the ground. And I think you have answered these, but I just want to put them out there. So I suppose that, we get them really clarified. But one of the questions is, can schools allow vaccinated parents onto the grounds? Which is, I think, something, Ruth, you've said yes, but is that straight away, or is that at certain levels of school opening?
Yeah. So as we return, we will be on what we're going to be calling level 3+ settings. So that's the settings I've just described. And as well as sort of minimising mingling of students and mingling of staff, actually, we will be minimising the number of visitors we have on site, including P&Cs probably, and including parents. So as I said, while we're not discriminating about vaccination status of parents, we just want to keep as few people on site as possible, particularly those not vaccinated. So you'll have to bear with us until we're ready to reopen and have you back on site.
Yeah, and I think, that's something, I suppose for us, as P&Cs, just working with our principals, in communicating to make sure that, we know, what we can and can't do. But I think that's been a concern from some of our members, in regards to, again, vaccinations, because, it's one of the questions that we've received is, has P&C been given clear directions from DOE for on-site P&C employee vaccination requirements from returning to full operations?
So in our list of people we expect to be vaccinated, volunteers is one of them. So volunteers as well as other contractors who work on site. So yeah, as far as we're concerned, the whole school community, adults on site, we want to be vaccinated, and that's why we've taken the quite controversial stand of making it mandatory for our teachers. That hasn't landed 100% popularly with our entire workforce, but it's for a good reason, and it's for the safety of everybody in school. So yeah, the same applies in terms of anyone who's volunteering, canteen staff, bus staff, contractors, gardeners, etc. Everybody on site to be vaccinated to keep our children safe.
Thanks, Ruth. I think that just just helps to clarify. I think with a lot of our members that that they understand that this is a requirement now. Moving forward. One of the other, I suppose, concerns really has been what if there's further outbreaks of COVID? Will the school be prepared to close again if needed? And what if what is the plan if there's an outbreak amongst the first return wave? Will future waves of your staggered approach then be held back if that happens, or will it just be a similar process to what was being implemented by the department when there was cases at some individual schools previously?
Yeah, so we'll take it on a case-by-case basis, but yeah, as I say, I think we have to be realistic and say with the size of our network, over 2,200 schools, there will be outbreaks. There are outbreaks in schools now with minimal attendance, and there will be as we go forward, which is why the importance of the vaccination status of all the adults is so important. So as always, we have to be agile to these things and be ready to respond to local circumstances. And I can only offer as an example what happened this week in Yass, where the school reopened as part of the regional stay-at-home orders being lifted on Monday. And they were back in lockdown by yesterday midnight. So these things happen. We have to kind of get used to it. We'll try and minimise the disruption to schooling, but it will happen, and we will have arrangements in place. As Leanne says, schools now know how to deal with this thing, both in terms of hygiene, but also in terms of flicking very quickly to learning from home status as well. Leanne, anything you want to add to that?
I think, recognising that we will have students arranged in cohorts, keeping with their class, keeping with their year level. So when you talk about the staggered return, for example, if a year level comes back and there is a case and some close contacts are identified, then they will need to stay away from school. But that doesn't stop the other year level from coming back because they're not close contacts to the student. So, we've worked through this. We're quite sophisticated at now at this with health, and that's why it's really important to keep our students in groups where we can identify really quickly who may have been a close contact. You will be aware of the research that's come out that actually shows the transmission between students in a school site is quite low. So this is leading us to believe this will be in a better place in a few weeks. Everyone in New South Wales is hoping we will be in a better place in a few weeks as well. So we're doing everything we can, putting the cohorting groups in place, the practices around lunchtimes, the practices around masks, the social distancing, the ventilation, ensuring that every adult in the school is vaccinated. And, health are telling us the best thing we can do for our kids to keep them safe is to have all the adults around them vaccinated. So, we're putting in a series of pieces that are all about keeping our children and our staff safe. Thanks,
Leanne. I'll just go to a few that are online, a few questions. Actually got a question from Natalie. Will it be, and it's not me, will it be the P&C's responsibility to check vaccination status of volunteers, or will that be a school's responsibility?
Anyone on site will be the school's responsibility to make sure that we are adhering to our policy about vaccination status of visitors, yeah, including the volunteers. You probably have seen on the news that the Service New South Wales app is going to be integrated with a kind of vaccine tracker. So that's what we will be using. Everybody should be used to checking in at schools now anyway. We've been doing that for several months. So as part of that, it will identify through your smartphone, if you have one, whether you've been vaccinated.
Thank you. I did have another question. I'm sorry, everyone, there are so many questions here and some have actually been answered. So I'm just going, but there was one, I can't find it. It was anonymous, but the person was asking, and I think you answered it, Ruth, but I suppose just to give a little bit more clarification that, if students have underlying health issues, and I think I can't find where the question is now. I think it was an autoimmune, something related to that. Are they able to opt out of the, attending school and continue to do home learning, if they're not vaccinated?
So again, case by case basis, we'll take every child and every student on a case by case basis. There's always going to be individual circumstances like that. So if you're a parent and that's your particular situation, as Leanne says, the best thing you can do is get in touch with the school and have that conversation about the continuity of learning. We do understand there are some really difficult circumstances and people with real genuine concerns about the safety of their children. So it's best to have that conversation with your principal.
Yeah, I think we need to really make sure that, parents, are talking to their principals, especially if they have these concerns. I've also got a question here from Lena. She just asks, if you live in an LG area of concern, but the school is not, do the kids return to school or not?
Oh, say that one again. Sorry, even I've got confused at that one.
I know. So if you live in an LGA area of concern, but the school that they attend is not in an LGA area of concern, do the kids return to school or no, do they stay at home?
So Paul looks like he wants to answer this one, but it may depend on the settings at the time of those LGAs, because I think we are expecting those LGAs of concern, their settings to change over the next month or so. But Paul, you probably have a better answer than that.
Look, and I suppose that the answer at the moment is that when we start the return to school on the 25th, if your school resumes face-to-face learning, we would expect that students would start to return to their school. Education is always a reasonable excuse for students to be able to move around. And so, the thing that's really important to us, and I saw Leanne nodding, is that when we can get kids back to face-to-face learning with their friends and back at school with the exposure to their teacher, that is what we are keen to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. And I think, we've got another question here from Leslie. And I do apologise, everyone. We have so many questions in this chat, and every time it comes up, it keeps moving. So please bear with me. I'm trying to keep my eye on them. But Leslie just asked, all kids, have had a different home learning experience. And so what strategies are going to be implemented for identifying and closing learning gaps?
Great question, Leslie. I think that's one for Leanne.
Yeah, that is a great question, and one we are paying very close attention to. So one of the things we did learn from last year was ensuring that we could identify the gaps and identify how we might do the catch up. And you'll know that there was the funding for the COVID learning support that was put in place. That's been a really successful program, and we've learned lots of things from that. So we will be doing some, very short, simple observation and testing pieces with kids as they go back to make sure we understand what learning may have been lost in this period, or where particular kids were thriving, so that we're really clear about what is the work we have to do to support every kid to make sure that they catch up on the work that they may have fell behind with, because we recognise there are different experiences for a whole range of kids across the state in this. So it's a really important piece of work, and a piece that, in fact, Paul has had absolute leadership of over the last 12 months. So I should have left it for him to talk about it. He is the expert on it. But we did see, can I say, the tool that we used in the most recent NAPLAN results has pointed to the fact that it was very accurate in terms of identifying the accuracy of where we needed to put extra support, and the support we put in place actually has managed to close the gap on last year's COVID experience. Having said this, this year is a longer period of time, but we're certainly investing the effort and the attention to that, and we'll have schools ready to go with every child to make sure that we catch up where we need to.
Great, thanks, Leanne. Look, it keeps moving. We've only got about another 5 minutes. And so, before we get on to our next session, which will be HSC exams. So, people, please, we haven't forgotten about the HSC, but we're just probably looking at more returning to school questions at the moment. And I did have another one.
Natalie, we will make sure these questions get answered. We won't get them through all in the webinar, but we will answer them and get back to you, of course.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. We really appreciate that.
So there was a couple of, Natalie, that I identified, if you're okay. One about so this is a common one. I've got a child in 1 year level and then another child in another year level, and they're not coming back at the same time. We know that's going to be tough for parents. We know that you're going to have one child going to school and one child in theory learning from home. That's a hard balancing act. But, if you can't do that, if you can't manage that for work reasons, for other responsibility reasons, as it has been the whole time through COVID, the schools will be open to support you with that piece of work. You just need to talk to your school around that. We know that's going to be challenging for some families. The other one was about wellbeing for students. Can I assure you that, as well as looking at what the learning loss might be as we return to school, one of the pieces we're supporting schools strongly with is resources and people around supporting wellbeing. So what are the activities we can do on return to lower anxiety? We know that is going to be there for them and for families. What's the support we can do there? We're providing whole packages of work around that, and contact directly with each school to make sure they've got what they need, and ensuring that the people we have that are the supports we have across the state in terms of wellbeing are used where they need to be used as we head back into school. So we're putting a big effort behind not only just the learning loss, but in terms of wellbeing as we return to school, and managing anxiety for children and other wellbeing factors that may have come out of understandable concerns while people have been at home, and the concerns that young children have about the impact of COVID on their family and friends.
Great, thank you, Leanne. And I'll just go. There's just a few more about masks, and you did touch on it, Ruth, but I thought we'll just have a look at them. But and one was from Juta. Will children have to wear masks in the schoolyard and during sports?
Definitely not during sports, because I think the health has said any kind of strenuous exercise doesn't require a mask. I think we're still waiting for advice on mask settings outdoors. So at the moment, the guidance we've got is about indoor masks. Yeah, because we've got a few questions here just in regards to lunchtime as well. Someone's just asked, how will children be safe, when masks are off? So assuming, outside, they can have their masks off possibly. Whatever we try and do, we'll try and mirror the community settings. So, we've had masks mandatory for outdoor wear for some time. If that changes, then we'll review our settings too. So that's why I'm not being definitive about that one at the moment. But on indoor, we're pretty confident we will want mask wearing as we return to school, just to keep everybody safe while they're in contained classrooms.
Yeah, thank you, Nat. So I've got a question from Louise, and she just asked, what about students with disabilities who will be, escalated, anxious, scared about COVID infection? And I think we did touch on this, but, how many psychologists and therapists are being sent to schools to support, students, these sort of vulnerable students and students of need?
Yeah, and that goes to what Leanne just said about the mental health and wellbeing support. So we've got a range of over 2,000 staff who work across the state, providing those kinds of sort of resilience and support, and some specifically dedicated to supporting students with disabilities. So yeah, every student is different, every student is special, and we'll make sure we have the right support for every student in their individual circumstances. And again, if you're worried about your particular child, just talk to the principal, talk about the particular concerns that you've got, and we'll find a right way through for them to return to school safely.
Great, thank you, Ruth. We'll now, we might head over to our next session, which is about the HSC exams, you know, which then leads us, you know, over to Mr. Paul Martin. Paul, I think, you know, we've got, you know, quite a few questions there in relation to the HSC exams. But I thought I'd just, you know, take this opportunity to just ask you to provide, you know, an overview for people attending, and then we might go to some questions.
Thank you very much, Natalie and panel, and people who are watching and listening. I've been reading the Q&As and the chats as they've been coming through, and I'm expecting that there's some really concerned parents and worried about their students doing the HSC. I understand it. There's also a lot of sort of medical conversation that I'm just not going to buy into, because I don't have any medical expertise, and reading reports online is not going to be useful in any advice I give you. So look, first of all, I'd acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people, and I pay respects to elders past and present, and to all the Aboriginal lands that we're sitting on at various parts of New South Wales today. What I'll try and do briefly is explain how we got to where we are now, and that should, I think, hopefully with some context, maybe even preempt some of the questions. The first thing is that when COVID re-emerged, we put together the COVID emergency panel, the team that had been dealing with the issue last year. That is the three sector heads, the heads of the three sectors, education sectors in New South Wales, and a senior principal and a representative of the larger union, the New South Wales Teachers Federation. So we've got very strong advice coming through that committee, plus myself as the head of NESA, and Professor Peter Shergold, who's the chair of the NESA board and the Chancellor of Western Sydney University. So we put the team back together again to make sure that we could deal with the issues as they arose. At first, as you'll remember, there were lockdown LGAs that were more specific than last year. When we dealt with COVID, the whole state went into lockdown for 6 to 8 weeks, and then they came out. This time it was really different. We had some parts of New South Wales in lockdown, some not at all for quite a while in Western New South Wales, and then everybody in at a stage 4, level 4, for various lengths of time. So the responses that we had last year, which were responses that covered all students and all teachers in the state, had to be slightly varied. We made a series of sequential decisions. The first thing we did was we put off as far as possible all of the major works, the dance, the drama, the performances, the woodwork and metalwork and textiles and design and the films and everything. So we gave as much time as we possibly could for those students, because we knew they'd been disrupted. We were going to mark those things as we would normally by sending out itinerant markers, but the health advice very strongly indicated we should not be sending people from the city to rural regions and potentially transferring COVID. We all know what's happened in the last few months in relation to that. So what we did last year was we made sure that the teachers who know the students best, the teachers who have supervised those major works and those performances and the language orals, they would mark their students' work and could take into account the dislocation and the issues that would have affected those students depending on the nature of the lockdown. I know what was happening. I spoke to many principals. I spoke to principals and teachers and the unions and the sectors regularly over that period. I think I've also spoken to P&C and to the Secondary Principals Council, to a range of other people, students as well. we had students where schools were still able to conduct reasonably good lessons because of their IT facilities. Other students who had parents or someone at home who could assist with a major work. And I know that there were students pulling up to schools out in Western Sydney and various parts of New South Wales with a shopping trolley, trying to get a coffee table in so they could continue working on it. The point I'm trying to make, parents, is that the difference across the state this time was incredible and very difficult for us to manage with a set of accommodations. But we did that as successfully as we did last year. Teachers mark their own students' work. They know what they're doing. They can accommodate, firstly. Secondly, give them as much time as possible. We also gave the schools and the teachers additional time to provide us with their marks so that they could do perhaps trials if they could manage them online or as assignments. They could have extra time to do that and conduct those right at the end of this term or much later than they would normally do. So the theme I'm trying to provide you is give as much power to the schools and the teachers and the principals as possible. Let them make the decisions. Let them have an understanding of making decisions based on where their students are. So we ended up then, of course, with a delay in the exam of the HSC by 1 week, which is exactly what we did last year. I think the Victorians had a delay that was a little bit longer than that. They managed to get their results back, I think, in either early January or between Christmas and New Year. So this is not the first time in Australia that what we've done has happened elsewhere. But we then got to advice that I think Ruth and Leanne and Paul have all mentioned. Health advice, not from the Sydney Morning Herald, not from the Daily Telegraph, not from experts talking on the radio. Health advice from Dr. Kerry Chant and New South Wales Health told us that the earliest date we could conduct the HSC was beginning the 9th of November. So that would allow for all of the teachers and all of the supervisors and all of the invigilators to be double vaxxed and an additional time after that for the vaccinations to be effective. And that brought us to that time, alongside the 70 to 80% of the population that health said should be vaccinated. So we ended up with the earliest date, HSC this year, 9th of November. That committee has met sometimes three times in 7 days, sometimes twice a week. We have factored in all of the sorts of advice we've been getting from the schools, heartfelt letters and questions from teachers and students and petitions, advice from the formal bodies that represent all of the interest groups in New South Wales. It's not a clear decision. As we were heading towards the 9th of November start date, we had people saying we should call off the HSC. I had to read, and you all read, every single day in the newspaper another article about the HSC. It became, in some respects, the most talked about thing in media to a disproportionate level. And I think it's affected the students' certainty and their capacity to knuckle down and focus. It's undermined to some degree their confidence, and it's been quite an ordeal for this group of Year 12 students. So we decided that we would then have to put some two things: rely only on the health advice provided, and then see what the options were. If the whole state was in lockdown, you couldn't run exams. But the anticipation at the time, and what we've been advised, is that the schools will be back largely by then, and then we had to make a decision about some or all of the exams. Now, the advice from NESA and my team was that we could run all of the exams, have the students finish in the first week of December, have the exams marked. 77,000 different students. There's 110 exams. It's a major logistical exercise. So we could finish by then, but it would take us a couple of weeks extra to get the marks back, because we're heading into the Christmas New Year period, which causes issues, obviously. And secondly, we are nervous about the number of illness misadventure claims we will have this year if there are outbreaks of COVID. Many of your questions refer to what happens if there's an outbreak of COVID. Well, the students don't go to school if that's the advice, and the school applies for illness misadventure, as would happen in any other year if something happened with that group of students. So the decision then made, with the strong resolve of the government and the minister and the NESA committee and all of the consultation we did, was that despite the fact many students and quite a few parents and some principals didn't want the exams to go ahead this year, there was a large body of people and stakeholders who believe that, in fact, not only should the students have an opportunity to demonstrate what they've learned over 13 years, not only that, but many students really want to hit those particular marks that get them into courses. And I'm not just talking about the big high end, you know, the 99.95s, but there are students who are aiming for results right across that spectrum. We also felt, and this is a strong view held by all of the principals I spoke to, that we needed to maintain a sense of purpose for the Year 12s. Even though I had someone tell me yesterday morning that their daughter burst into tears when she found the exams were delayed to the 9th of November. But I also have heard other people feel quite good and resolved that they've got something to aim for, that they've got 8 weeks to focus on this, that their schools will be able to focus with them, that their teachers will help. So we go from the 9th of November to the 3rd of December. Results will come back to the HSC results will be released on the 24th of January. We've worked really closely with Kim, who's on screen, and the team from the Vice Chancellors to allow the ATAR to come out just before the HSC this year. We want the students who wish to go to university to get their ATAR and have their offers as quickly as possible. We're all trying to wrap around the kids and what they feel that they need, and we're doing it the best way possible. So the exams themselves, Ruth mentioned and Leanne mentioned, it's an adaptation, Paul, of course, of what the rest of the advice is. Well ventilated. If we can have as few students as possible, or in well ventilated small rooms, or as many students as need to be in ventilated large rooms, they will be wearing masks. They will need to hand sanitize. The schools will clean the desks after each of the exams. We'll be discouraging and attempting for the schools to coordinate that there is no mingling of students before and after the exams. We will have every single supervisor and invigilator double vaxxed. They won't be allowed in the place unless they are. We will attempt to make sure that every student signs off on, not signs off, but indicates that they're not suffering from any health issues on the day. And if they do suffer from health issues on the day, they shouldn't come to school. Fill out an illness misadventure form. So I expect there are parents here who are just really worried about their students, really worried about their children, wish the exams weren't happening. There are others who may be feeling that we should be getting along and getting it done with the health advice. The decision has been made with the full knowledge of our health advice and the education community in New South Wales. And what I would encourage everybody to do is to talk to the schools, talk to the teachers, talk to your children, and focus on the 9th of November to the 3rd of December. And then it's the HSC is over for 2021. It's been a really hard year. We recognise it. Exhausting, dreadful. These kids will be the most resilient students that have ever walked out of a school. But we believe we've made the right decision, notwithstanding the fact that there may well be people who disagree with it. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you, Paul. And look, we do understand this is, it's a really difficult situation. And as you mentioned, we've got families, and students that really want to, their child to go back and to sit the HSC. And we've got others that are really, really concerned, especially with the lockdowns, and particularly for our metropolitan, Greater Sydney areas that have been in lockdown since June, and not having that face-to-face for so long. But, we do appreciate, the time and effort that's been put into this. And I mean, these decisions are really difficult, and we need to understand that not everyone's going to be happy with some of the decisions being made. But it's great that you're here tonight, because I think it's just providing some clarity, for our families and for our students. And I think, you did touch on this in regards to that consultation. So obviously, with the heads of the different education systems, and obviously, New South Wales Health and the committee, but we've just had some questions come through, just asking, were students or teachers consulted? Are they a part of the consultation process for this, especially in regards to pushing the HSC back? And just, that student voice.
So look, it's a great question. In some respects, it's often easier to talk to the groups of people who are represented, like P&C or the secondary principals or independent principals or the unions, and students are not as cleanly or as clearly able to be represented like that. What we've done is had extensive consultation with school principals. As I said, we have a member of the Teachers Federation on our COVID emergency committee. I'm in touch with the other union, and I have regular phone conversations. I'm doing one of these with all of the principals, the secondary school, government school principals in the lockdown LGAs tomorrow. So what we hear from, what we miss out on direct conversation with students, we get through their teachers, we get through their principals, and it is a mixed message. Some of them, I got on Friday afternoon when the timetable was put out, I got 2 or 3 really congratulatory text messages saying this is fantastic, they can focus, they want their kids back at school. But I got a couple saying, gosh, this is going to be hard to get our kids through this, they're already feeling down. So we do talk to a lot of teachers and we talk to a lot of principals, and we do it through the representative groups, but the best way we can get to the kids is via their teachers. They trust their teachers, particularly in Year 12.
If I can just jump in there, Paul, you know I joined the minister on lots of roundtables she's done with Year 12 students across the state. And, you know, they've certainly expressed their views all through term 3 about what should happen with the HSC. So she certainly had that information and used that. And I'm sure she shared that with Paul, the information she was getting. But can I say, just like Paul said, you know, there in every group there were students who had the whole range of views about how it should happen, and that was time and time again. There were groups that wanted it to go ahead, groups that wanted it stopped, groups that wanted some of it. So, you know, groups that wanted it pushed back, groups that wanted it brought forward. So, you know, it is one of those decisions. But I can assure you that the minister engaged with Year 12 students from across the state.
Yeah, and I think I think that's just been one of the concerns, you know, of parents. But I think it's great for them to hear that, you know, those conversations, Paul, you know, you're having with principals, so that they know, you know, their principals are having these direct conversations, which, you know, for so many parents and carers, they're not aware of what is actually going on behind the scenes. So I think it's really great, you know, that they're able to sort of hear what's going on. But I think.
I'll just say, Natalie, the minister's been doing that all term 3. So, you know, across the state, engaged with so many Year 12 students, which has been great.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic to hear. And I think, but I think the hard thing that we hear from a lot of parents, especially with this group, and, you know, my heart does go out to them. We had COVID last year when they were in Year 11, you know, and had that lockdown as well. And then this year, you know, it's been extended. And yeah, you know, like you said, I think that they will be some of the most resilient young people going out in our communities. But again, you know, the concern from some of our parents and some of the question, you know, relates to that, you know, fairness, I suppose, you know, that, you know, they're just sort of questioning, you know, why, you know, a HSC can be considered fair when some kids in Sydney have had nothing, you know, but lockdown at the moment since like June the 25th. And then you've got, you know, other schools out in, you know, regional areas that have had lockdowns lifted, you know, and just the expectation, I suppose, placed on them to be able to perform to the best of their ability. It's a hard one, but I'm just putting it out there. It was just, you know, I suppose that disadvantage, and I suppose that's where that feeling is coming from parents, I think.
Sure. Look, I appreciate that. The hardest thing to deal with is the very variable nature of the lockdown and the variable nature of the effect of the lockdown, not only within schools, but within the student body. Some students have access to things that other students simply do not. And so there are some students who need to be at school more. They need the structure, they need the advice from their principals or their individual subject classroom teachers, and we recognise that. So the HSC isn't just the written exams. Anyone who's got a parent of an HSC student knows what I'm about to say, but there's 50% of the results come from school-based assessment. And those school-based assessments this year and for last year were able to be adapted and adjusted based on the school's decisions about the needs of the students. That includes the marking of those major works, et cetera, et cetera. So we've accommodated as far as we can in the most abnormal circumstances possible. Once in a 100-year pandemic, how do we accommodate around the school assessment? So I feel like it's not perfect, of course, but it's as good as we could have done, and it worked very successfully last year. As far as the exams themselves, given the variability of the experience, we need to be able to come up with something robust, because the HSC has to be valid and reliable. It has to be able to allow someone like Kim, who's online here, to admit students to courses on the basis of the rigor of the exam. It simply can't be something I pull out on the back of an envelope. So the committee and my assessment team are currently at work attempting to work through, and I think they did last year and we will this year, what sort of special consideration will there be available based on a teacher and or a principal's recommendation for students who have been severely affected by the lockdown. So we will be back to provide this information, and this is not information that you get from the Premier at 11 o'clock. This information we provide out to schools every single week in a NESA news bulletin, and the department and the other sectors follow us up. So the schools and the principals find out as quickly as we can about these processes. And I'm already getting a lot of conversation about the question you just asked, Natalie. How do we compensate for the kids who are really severely affected? So we'll be working on that. We've got now till the 9th of November, but an application process that will need to occur before they come back to school in term 4. And if it's any consolation to you, Natalie, I have 2 children in public schools, and I've been going through all of this myself. I can't wait till they get back to school. It's exhausting.
Oh, it's very difficult. Look, I think it's definitely mixed reactions. People, trying to do work and home learning as well. But no, we really appreciate, just the honesty that we're having, I think, tonight, and being able to communicate with our members. And I think that leads us to Kim. We're really lucky to have Kim here tonight, because I think, I do have some questions with universities, and I know there's some coming through. So I thought maybe, Kim, it might be just good for you just to maybe give everyone a bit of an overview in regards to, what are universities doing, at the moment to support these students, like Paul said, and working, with our educational, sectors, to support students, looking to apply for university, with our Year 12s this year.
Thanks, Natalie. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on Darug land this evening. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging also. So thank you for the opportunity. I can trump Paul. I've got a Year 12 student this year, so I'm living it in all kinds of ways. And I've been following the chat, obviously, and lots of parents saying that their Year 12 student has, lost motivation. I can completely relate to that. It's a daily battle to keep any student sort of focused. A Year 12 student is also feeling a bit bereft of all the things that they were looking forward to, obviously, and seeing them slip away and not getting the chance to be with their friends. So there's so much in this. It's hard to unpack it all, and so many elements as we've been discussing. And again, we are getting feedback from students all the time, and it's not homogenous. My son was very happy to know that he can sit his exams, because he feels like maybe he can actually pull it out of the bag at the last minute, probably. But other students are thinking, well, can you just use my earlier results because I was doing so much better then? So it's not consistent at all. And there's a theme here for tonight as well. As hard as we're trying, we're not going to please everybody. And I feel like it's the same at UAC and with university entry. Everyone wants special consideration. Everyone wants it acknowledged that, they've had difficulty through this period. And that is 100% true. Everyone's had a difficult time in various ways. So whatever we put in place, it's going to be the best we can possibly do in the circumstances, taking everything into account, but we won't satisfy everyone. And I know that straight up, but we are all trying really hard to make this the best we possibly can. Now, I did want to start, Natalie, with a couple of things that I know have already been asked. Now, one is around interstate applications, because New South Wales is now, you know, at the end of the process compared to other states, whereas previously we've always been right out there in front, getting our results all out there first. We now find ourselves in the opposite situation, which is we're last. And what does that mean for our students who are wanting to apply interstate? Now, I can tell you that I'm working really closely with my colleagues interstate at the admission centres in all the other states. And we're going to be able to release some joint information, hopefully this week, that we'll be putting out, that will cover off on what each state is doing and when their offer rounds are, so that people have some clarity around that. But the main issue is that interstate institutions are very aware of New South Wales now having a very delayed release. And those institutions who want to make offers to New South Wales and ACT students will obviously need to keep some places available, essentially. So they'll be making offers to their local students and to anyone whose results they have earlier, while they know that New South Wales and ACT results will be later. So it is about the interstate admission centres working with their local interstate institutions to ensure that the processes are in place. And as I said, they're all working through that now because we really only just, you know, announced the availability of New South Wales and ACT results. Some of those states have late January offer rounds that may well accommodate New South Wales and ACT students, and some states may adjust their offer rounds. We're really not sure at the moment. There's a few different things they can do. All I can say right now is that they know this is an issue and they are working towards how they can accommodate New South Wales and ACT students in the same way that previously we have accommodated them because their results have been later than ours. So it's really just the reverse of where we've been. I guess it's just uncomfortable for us because now we're at the back of the queue rather than at the front, but it's the same sort of process, that we're all working collaboratively to make sure that students are not disadvantaged. And as I say, we'll have something you know, published and out available soon about that with a bit more clarity, but that's what we're working on at the moment. The other thing that has come up as a consistent theme is what special consideration in terms of university entry will be given to students because of COVID-related disadvantage. Again, this comes back to what I just said. Everybody feels as though their particular disadvantage needs to be recognised. And while it's hard to argue against that, at UAC and in terms of the university entry process, the framework we have in place for considering disadvantage, it will not account for remote learning. That's the bottom line. We have an educational access schemes process, and that's for long-term educational disadvantage. And we have added particular categories that are related to COVID, and they're around the COVID payments. So JobKeeper, JobSeeker, JobSaver, COVID disaster payments, all of those are included in those schemes. So parents who have been in receipt of any of those payments for at least 3 months, their children are eligible, but we do not have a remote learning disadvantage specifically. We have 26 or something like that other disadvantages that students can claim, and we obviously encourage students to claim for any and all disadvantages that they're eligible for, and for many students that does make the difference between getting an offer and not getting an offer. So it is a really important scheme, but the framework we have for that is not going to consider remote learning specifically. There's a few reasons for that. Paul touched on this. It's not consistent, again, across the board in terms of how people have reacted to remote learning. While, you know, there are plenty that have found it a real struggle, others, you know, it's allowed them to focus a bit more. So I can't say with any confidence at all that this is something that applies equally to everyone. We need really rigorous documentation around the disadvantage. So that is something that we have to insist upon, and it is difficult to obtain when we're talking about these things. And as Paul said, there is a process that NESA is also working on. So we're kind of alongside what NESA is doing. The other thing that is very important for everyone to remember is that in terms of university entry, what we're talking about is a ranking. And it is not useful for us to simply apply an adjustment to every student based on the fact that they've all suffered some kind of remote learning disadvantage, because it really ends up having no effect. It's really about targeting those special considerations and those adjustments for the most disadvantaged students. So that's what we're focusing on. And on top of that, universities are making plenty of early offers based on other things. So that's something that students have really embraced. Many students already have early offers. They may not be to their absolute preferred course, and that may come through later based on ATAR, but many students already have that in place. So that has been some comfort to a lot of students that they already have those, and they've been made based on other things. So those things are all in place, and individual universities are also making adjustments as they see fit. So there's a lot of things happening, trying to make it as equitable as possible. Of course, that's foremost in everyone's mind, and also to facilitate those university offers in the way we always would. So I hope that's helpful for some of the questions, at least, Natalie.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, it was, I think, that covered a few of the questions that we've had coming through our feed, and as we said, things that are constantly changing, and we understand it really is difficult, trying to make these decisions and accommodate so many students across our public schools. I think what we haven't got much longer, so I'm just going to try and get through a few more questions, particularly related to the HSC that's come through. One of the main things that's been coming through was about vaccinations. Will all Year 12s be able to be vaccinated prior to returning?
So that's my understanding. I'll have to refer this to perhaps my colleagues in the department, but the timing for the date of the HSC to begin on the 9th allows for 2 vaccinations in time after that. But I might throw that to Paul and or Ruth.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Paul. So we're not mandating vaccinations for students. We're strongly encouraging everyone to make use of the vaccinations that we're now all seeing come through at last. And so we do believe the date was set so that we can have, so all Year 12 students can have access to 2 doses of vaccination before their exams start.
Yeah, I think we understand, it's not mandatory for them, but, I think that was, just making sure that there was that time for them to, be able to have that vaccination. Just got another question from Megan Thomas. Megan's just asking, she says, our high school runs a combined senior curriculum for its HSC program, and this relies on students completing their first senior year exams on time with the usual HSC timetable, so they can immediately commence their second senior year. With a 3-week delay that delays their start of their second senior year by 3 weeks, and she's got, that's the 6 weeks of equivalent learning. The program, they cannot be caught up with the HXC's run on time in 2022. How will that be accommodated? And then she's got a question, will it be a misadventure?
So look, that's a really specific question, and I apologise for not being right across the nature of some of the, we have condensed curriculum, we have students who do the HSC over a number of years, et cetera. All I would say is that at every opportunity when we're presented with a question like that, or a request from a school, we accommodate it. So if there's any way of providing the results back later, we'll do that. If there's anything that we need to do about illness misadventure, we'll do that. Our primary responsibility is to make sure the students have certainty and it's as equitable as we can make it. So if that question comes to me afterwards, I'll have that followed up tomorrow. And if we need to make a decision, like a whole of state decision in relation to that, we'll do that at the next COVID committee meeting.
Thanks, Paul. I've got another question. It's from, I'm just trying to read this. Sorry, again, everyone, I apologise. I'm just trying to get through some of these questions. But again, it's directed at you, Paul. I think, this is helpful context, but I'm interested to understand what why the delayed HSC with ongoing stress and uncertainty. They are not convinced it is still going ahead. Was considered preferable to cancel HSC. What were the key factors in making this call? How was student consulted? Sorry, so you've sort of answered this, Paul. But
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. It was a balancing. It's a balance of decisions as to what it is. We want students to have as much opportunity to demonstrate what they know and can do. They do five or six subjects. Some of them they're really strong in. Some of them they're weaker in. Some of them have done better in their school-based assessment and are nervous about the sit-down exams. Others are just building up for that exam, and we know they were heading for it. We believe that the most equitable decision for most students in each subject was to run the suite of exams as long as health said we could. So that's the balance of our decision was made around there. And we had mental health advice. I mean, it can go in many different directions. So I'm not going to, try and pretend that I have expertise, but we were told that for many students, the focus, the certainty, having a goal, keeping them occupied rather than being not in that space at the moment was actually a really bad thing. We needed to keep them focused and goal oriented. And as much as that's quite hard, going up into your room every day to study again and knowing that it's now off until the 9th, recognize it. Kim's got it happening at home. But on the balance of all of the issues and all of the evidence, looking after the kids, first and foremost, the students and their needs and their interests and their futures, we came to this decision.
Thanks, Paul. I think that clarified for Ray there. I've got a statement here from Nikki. It's not sort of a question, but it makes me sort of think that maybe they thought there might have been some changes to the exams, but it just says the exam timetable seems to be pretty much the same, but just pushed back. They look like the same length exams. So it's just been the same, just moved back.
Look, we did look at other combinations of exams. I mean, I can say this now, it was all speculation in the paper, but we had to, if we were trying to accommodate getting results back as early as possible without the full suite, what would you do? And that requires timetable, a very sort of significant timetable shift. If you can imagine people who are listening, say 70,000 students, each doing 5 subjects, and we have to organize a timetable so that no student has 2 exams on at the same time. It's a huge logistical exercise. When we came down to reducing the number of exams, we thought it was less fair. We thought it was less fair because some students would have to do more exams than others if their exams were being examined, their subjects were being examined. We also, how do you make a decision? Why commerce and why economics and not business studies? Why French and not Italian? Why? So the best thing was always the full suite. As for having sections of exams, the logistics of all of those papers, there's, I think, 2 million separate individual exam papers. Trying to provide advice to 2,000 to 3,000 supervisors that the students should do question 1 but not question 3, or do the second question on the first page, or take the middle of the paper out and only do the first question, is just a recipe for disaster. So we did transpose the existing timetable 3 weeks later. I think that's it, with the exception of some of the, what they call the CACAFL language exams, which are run nationally and will be run because they have to run at the same time across the country. So they're the only exams that won't be running in New South Wales, I think, are 11 CACAFL languages. But otherwise, it's exactly as you described, Natalie. The best, most efficient, clearest and most understood and easily communicated way to run the exams was to transpose them 3 weeks later. 4 weeks later.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Paul. So look, we've got so many questions, and I do apologise to everyone that we haven't been able to get through them, but we will make sure that they're answered towards the end. But I've just got one more question. It's just from Karen before we end, and she just asked, what contingencies will be in place to mitigate disruption of HSC exams, obviously due to COVID cases, once the exams have commenced and in the 2 weeks preceding. So obviously, Paul, you'd mentioned, if there's COVID, there's misadventure, but I suppose, is there any, strategies in place to mitigate that disruption?
Sure. We'll be providing advice to the schools about appropriate venues and alternative venues if necessary. Last year we did this. We did ask schools to have a venue ready, and in fact, there were 22 bomb scares in New South Wales schools and throughout the HSC last year, which is just what we needed on top of COVID. And in fact, the alternative venues that schools had organised because of COVID worked particularly well on those days. So we'll be asking schools, working with their system and their sector, the department, to identify venues if they need to, so that if a COVID infection occurs, the school can be deep cleaned and the students can go to an alternative venue either within the school or outside of it. If something happens on the day of the exam, that whole cohort gets illness misadventure, and we'll be able to apply that based on their school-based assessment. If an individual student is ill, they will also be eligible for illness misadventure. And if the state government, if the Kerry Chant and the health department advise the Premier that we have a wide-scale lockdown, we will apply the appropriate processes there. My team are working on every single contingency.
Thank you, Paul. And that wraps us up, I think, for this evening. And I really, want to thank our speakers for coming tonight, Ruth, Paul, Leanne, Paul, and Kim. We really do appreciate the time, that you've taken, out tonight to speak to our P&C communities across New South Wales. But we'd just like to acknowledge that, it is a very difficult and challenging time for you all as well. And we know that you've got the best interests of our children, in your decision making. And, we do thank you, I think, for coming tonight and having these, open conversations with our members. It's really been appreciated. It's definitely not an easy job. But we'd also just like to thank, all of you for joining us this evening. We hope that you've, found this, quite an informative webinar, and we've hopefully helped clarify some questions that many of you may have had. We've had, nearly 900 people register for this webinar tonight. And I think, as you could see, going through the Q&A, it was there was just questions constantly coming through, and it was, we're just trying to keep up with everyone. And I know we didn't get to everyone and answer all your questions, but I do feel like our speakers, were able to cover, a wide range of areas of concern that hopefully can, just calm everyone's mind a little bit more, and, give a little bit of reassurance in regards to returning to school and our students, doing the HSC this year. And we'll also have our questions, as we said, we'll have them answered for you as well, and they'll be made available. This is something that, has been great, with NESA and the department. They've been really great in, just helping to answer your questions that we haven't, gotten to, and we'll definitely make sure that they'll be available for you. You'll, at the end of this webinar, you'll be directed towards a survey. We'd really appreciate your feedback on tonight's webinar. The recording of the webinar will also be available in approximately 1 week on our website, and you'll receive notification via email in relation to this. Again, we just want to acknowledge the work that you're doing. Thank you for coming on tonight. We really hope that there's a certain, bit of peace of mind that you've all been able to take away tonight. We understand it's a really challenging time, for families, for carers, and, and for our children. We're all thinking of our Year 12 students, and, as Paul said, they will be extremely resilient, I think, coming out. And we'll be lucky to have, young people like them, leading us, into the future. So again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to you all for joining. And I'd just like to say good night, everyone. Stay safe and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.